What happens when a homeless man walks into court, only to reveal he was once a top lawyer? What if the judge mocking him is hiding a dark secret? And what if the most powerful man in the city wants him erased forever? Cassius Vaughn lost everything: his career, his home, his dignity. But now, he's fighting back. And this time, the system that betrayed him is about to crumble. Don't miss this shocking story. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. The air inside Chicago Federal Courtroom 3B was thick with judgment. It wasn't just the towering marble columns or the sharp scent of polished wood that made it feel suffocating. It was the people. The jurors, the spectators, even the bailiff. They were all staring at him. Cassius Vaughn sat at the defendant's table, his back straight despite the ache in his muscles. His clothes, an old, oversized coat, tattered jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days, told the story before he even spoke. He looked like what they expected: a nobody, a criminal, a waste of space. And Judge Everett Kincaid, oh, he was eating it up. Kincaid sat high on his bench, his robe draped over his bulky frame like he was some kind of monarch looking down at an unworthy subject. He was known in legal circles for being ruthless, particularly when it came to people like Cassius, the ones who had no power, no connections, and certainly no way to fight back. He leaned forward, peering over his glasses with a smirk. "Mr. Vaughn, you stand accused of breaking and entering, grand larceny, and aggravated assault. A rather colorful resume, don't you think?" The courtroom chuckled. Cassius said nothing. Kincaid continued, "Now, I don't expect a man of your background to understand the gravity of these charges, so let me break it down for you." Another chuckle from the audience. The jury members exchanged smirks, a few even shaking their heads. The bailiff covered a grin. The prosecutor, Desmond Rourke, just sighed, shuffling his papers like this was all routine. Cassius clenched his jaw. This was how they saw him, not as a man, not as someone who had once stood on their side of the bench, just another case, just another guilty man waiting for a sentence. Judge Kincaid sighed dramatically. "This is a courtroom, Mr. Vaughn, not some street corner, and you—" He gestured vaguely at Cassius' clothes, his unkempt beard, his overall state of existence. "Look like you crawled out of a dumpster. Tell me, do you even understand what's happening here, or should I ask someone to translate in? What cardboard sign language?" Laughter. More laughter. Cassius stayed silent. Kincaid tilted his head. "Tell me, Mr. Vaughn, have you ever stepped foot in a courtroom before? Or is this your first time being somewhere that doesn't throw you out for loitering?" The laughs turned into whispers, the cruel kind that slithered between the benches like venom. Cassius slowly lifted his eyes to meet Kincaid's. His voice, though quiet, cut through the noise like a blade. "Your Honor," he said, "I have stood in your position before." And just like that, silence. The whispers died. The laughter evaporated. The air changed. For the first time, Judge Kincaid's smirk wavered. Prosecutor Desmond Rourke straightened in his chair. His eyes, which had been filled with indifference, narrowed with curiosity. Kincaid blinked. "Excuse me." Cassius didn't blink. "I said," he repeated, voice calm, steady, unwavering, "I have stood in your position before." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged looks. Some leaned in. Kincaid frowned, gripping the edge of his bench. "That's a bold claim, Mr. Vaughn." Cassius tilted his head slightly. "Is it?" For the first time since the trial started, the judge hesitated, and then the doors burst open. A young man in a sharp navy blue suit rushed into the courtroom, his face flushed, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "Your Honor," the man called, holding a thick folder in his hands. Kincaid scowled. "Who the hell are you, and why are you interrupting my courtroom?" The man ignored him, moving straight to Prosecutor Rourke's table. He leaned down, whispering something in Rourke's ear, and just like that, everything shifted. The color drained from Rourke's face. His fingers twitched over his paperwork, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. He grabbed the folder, flipping it open so fast the pages nearly ripped. His eyes scanned the contents, a beat of silence. Then he looked up at Cassius, his expression, like he had just seen a ghost. Kincaid's scowl deepened. "Prosecutor Rourke, what is the meaning of this?" Rourke didn't respond immediately. He licked his lips, staring at Cassius for a long, hard moment before slowly turning the folder toward the judge. "This man," he said, voice tight, "is not just some random defendant. His name is Cassius Vaughn, and he was once one of the top federal prosecutors in this city." Gasps. A wave of shock rolled through the room. People whispered in disbelief. Judge Kincaid's grip on his gavel tightened. "What?" Rourke swallowed. "Cassius Vaughn graduated from Yale Law. He was a federal prosecutor, one of the best. He's argued high-profile cases in this very courtroom." Kincaid's jaw clenched. "That's impossible." Cassius finally spoke again. "Is it?" Another silence. The spectators who had been laughing at him minutes ago now stared at him in stunned silence. The bailiff, who had been smirking before, looked unsure, and Judge Everett Kincaid, for the first time in years, he looked nervous. Cassius leaned forward slightly, his voice just loud enough for everyone to hear. "What else have you gotten wrong, Your Honor?" The room held its breath. Kincaid's fingers stopped drumming. His jaw clenched. For the first time since Cassius walked into this courtroom, the judge had no witty insult ready. Because suddenly, this wasn't just another case. And Cassius Vaughn, he wasn't just another defendant. 3 years ago, Cassius Vaughn had everything. A corner office in downtown Chicago, a reputation as one of the sharpest legal minds in the federal system, and the unwavering belief that the law was meant to serve justice. He had fought hard for every case, never backing down, never compromising his integrity. He wasn't just a prosecutor, he was a force. The kind of man that judges respected, criminals feared, and the corrupt despised. And then it all fell apart. The call came late, 1:34 a.m., to be exact. Cassius had been working late at his office, finishing notes for a high-profile racketeering case. His desk was covered in legal briefs, coffee stains, and a half-eaten sandwich he had long since forgotten. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it, almost. But something, a gut instinct maybe, made him answer, and then his world ended. "Mr. Vaughn, this is Dr. Patel from St. Mary's Medical Center. I'm calling about your mother, Eleanor Vaughn. There's been an accident." Cassius had felt frozen. Like the walls around him were closing in, like his lungs had stopped working. "An accident? What do you mean? What happened?" A pause, too long. "Sir, I'm very sorry. She didn't make it." The words barely registered. Didn't make it. Didn't make it where? What the hell was this doctor saying? The next few hours were a blur, rushing to the hospital, being told it was a hit and run, standing there, staring at his mother's body, waiting for it to feel real. It never did. Then came the police report. The driver, Daniel Wexler, billionaire, real estate mogul, owner of half of downtown Chicago, and just like that, Cassius knew. This wouldn't be a fair case. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was about power. Cassius went to war. He had prosecuted drug lords, white-collar criminals, organized crime families. He had never lost a case he truly believed in. And this was personal. He filed charges. He pulled surveillance footage. He found the damn car, parked in Wexler's private garage, the hood dented, the paint scratched, the damage obvious. But before the case could even go to trial, things started going wrong. Witnesses recanted their statements. The evidence disappeared from police custody. The judge assigned to the case suddenly withdrew, citing a conflict of interest. And then came the call. Not from Wexler, but from Elias Mercer. Cassius had heard the name before. Everyone had. Elias Mercer was a shadow, a billionaire who wasn't just rich. He controlled the people who made the rules. Politicians, CEOs, judges, they all answered to him. Mercer didn't run for office. He didn't need to. When Mercer spoke, people listened. Cassius met him at a private club in the Gold Coast district. The kind of place where the waiters never made eye contact and the air smelled like expensive scotch and old money. Mercer was waiting for him at the bar. He looked exactly how Cassius expected, tall, silver hair slicked back, a man who had never been told no in his life. "Cassius," he greeted smoothly. "What a pleasure." Cassius didn't sit. "Cut the bullshit, Mercer. What do you want?" Mercer just smiled. "To help," Cassius laughed. "Help you're trying to cover for Wexler." Mercer swirled his drink lazily. No, I'm trying to save you from making a terrible mistake. Bringing a murderer to justice is a mistake." Mercer sighed like he was speaking to a child. "Cassius, you know how this ends." Cassius stiffened. "You're fighting against a man with unlimited resources. Wexler will never see the inside of a cell, and if you keep pushing, neither will you, because there won't be anything left of your career to put behind bars." Mercer leaned in. "You have a choice. Drop the case, take the easy way out, and maybe I help you out in return." Cassius clenched his fists. "I don't need your help," Mercer smirked. "You will." And with that he finished his drink, left some cash on the table, and walked away. Cassius didn't drop the case, he fought, and he lost. Not in the courtroom, he never even got that far. Within 2 months he was suspended for ethical misconduct. False allegations surfaced that he had tampered with evidence. A bar review board found him unfit to practice law. And then, one night, his lowest point, drunk, broken, alone, he got behind the wheel, flashing lights, sirens, handcuffs. A DUI charge, the final nail in the coffin. The day he lost his license, he lost everything. His savings vanished under legal fees. His home was foreclosed. His friends stopped returning his calls. Within months, Cassius Vaughn, the former top prosecutor of Chicago, was sleeping in shelters. Within a year, he was just another ghost on the streets. And then, 3 months ago, Mercer came back. It was in a dingy diner on the South Side where the coffee tasted like burnt motor oil and the booths were held together with duct tape. Mercer slid into the seat across from him. "Look at you." Cassius said nothing. Mercer leaned in. "I can fix this." Cassius met his eyes. "No, you don't even know what I'm offering." "I don't care," Mercer sighed, shaking his head. "You're a stubborn bastard." Cassius just stared at him. "Go to hell, Mercer." Mercer smiled, but there was something dangerous behind it now. "You just made a very bad decision, Cassius." He stood, dropped a 20 on the table, and left. 3 months later, Cassius Vaughn was arrested for a crime he didn't commit. And just like that, Mercer had won. Cassius Vaughn had been behind bars for exactly 64 days, and in that time, he had learned one thing: he wasn't supposed to make it out alive. At first, he had held onto the idea that maybe this was just another part of Mercer's plan, to break him, keep him locked away until he rotted. But it didn't take long to realize that Mercer wasn't satisfied with Cassius just being in prison. No, Mercer wanted him gone. Erased. The first few weeks had been subtle: a missing meal here, a misplaced medical record there. Little inconveniences designed to wear him down. Then came the guards. They weren't all bad, but the ones who were, they had orders. Cassius had seen it in their eyes when they slammed him against the wall too hard during a routine search, when they let a group of inmates jump him in the yard and took just a little too long to step in. Bruised ribs, a split lip, a concussion. Nothing fatal, not yet. But Cassius knew it was only a matter of time. It happened on day 64. Cassius had just finished dinner, if you could call it that. Some kind of gray, unidentifiable meat and a piece of bread that probably had a longer life expectancy than he did. He was heading back to his cell when 2 guards flanked him. "New protocol," one of them said, grabbing his arm. Cassius didn't resist. He'd learned not to. They led him past his cell, past the general population, and into the showers. Empty, Cassius stopped walking. He had prosecuted enough cases to know what was coming. One of the guards grinned. The other locked the door behind them. "Warden wants you transferred," the first one said. "Yeah," Cassius flexed his fingers. "That right. MHM." The second one cracked his knuckles. To the morgue. The first punch came fast. Cassius barely dodged it, stepping back, but there was nowhere to go. The second guard swung low, aiming for his ribs. This one landed. Pain exploded through Cassius' side, but he had no time to react before they came at him again. Another hit. This time to his jaw. His head snapped back. His vision blurred. But Cassius wasn't going to die in a fucking prison shower. Not like this. Not for Mercer. The next punch came, and this time he caught it. Crack. The guard screamed as Cassius twisted his wrist hard enough to break it. The other one lunged. Cassius grabbed him by the collar and slammed his head against the wall. One down. The second one staggered back, reaching for his baton, but Cassius was faster. He ripped it from the guy's hands and drove it straight into his gut. The guard choked, gasped, collapsed. Cassius stood there, panting, his knuckles bruised and bleeding. Then he heard it, the distant sound of footsteps. More were coming. He had to move. Now. Cassius pulled the guard's ID badge off his belt, grabbed his uniform jacket, and slipped it over his own. The moment he stepped out of the showers, he didn't walk like an inmate. He walked like a guard, head up, confident, like he belonged. No one stopped him, not when he passed through the first security checkpoint, not when he nodded at another officer, not until he got to the loading bay. The final gate, almost there. Then, hey, Cassius froze, a real guard staring at him. Where you headed? Cassius turned slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. Warden's orders, he said, voice steady. Routine security check. The guard frowned. Didn't hear about that. Cassius shrugged. You want to be the one to call the warden and check. A pause. The guard hesitated. Then finally, yeah, all right, get moving. Cassius didn't wait. He stepped through the last door and into the night. The second he stepped out of that prison, he knew his life was over. At least the life he used to have. No more walking freely. No more using his real name. No more trusting anyone. Because within an hour his face was on every news station. A manhunt was underway, and there was only one person who could help him now. Selene Hartley. Finding her wasn't hard. She still lived in the same apartment in Lincoln Park, same security system. Cassius knew the codes. So when Selene walked into her apartment that night, he was already there. She didn't scream. She didn't reach for a weapon. She just stared. And then, you've got to be kidding me. Cassius sat on the edge of her couch, wincing as he pressed a cloth to his bleeding side. Nice to see you too, Selene. She closed the door behind her. You escaped. Yeah. You're on every news channel in the country. Yeah, she let out a sharp breath. Jesus, Cassius, what the hell did you do? I didn't have a choice. His voice was quieter now. Selene ran a hand through her hair. You know what? Doesn't matter. You need to go. Cassius didn't move. I need your help. Absolutely not. Selene. No. She turned on him, eyes flashing. You're a fugitive. Do you understand what happens to me if anyone finds out you were here? I lose my license, my job, my life. Cassius stared at her. I didn't do it. She hesitated. Cassius pressed on. You know me. Do you really think I'd be here if I was guilty? Another pause, and then she sighed. Damn it, Cassius. She didn't say yes, but she didn't call the cops either. Instead, she pulled up his case file on her laptop, and within 20 minutes her frown deepened. This doesn't make sense. Cassius leaned forward. What? She turned the screen toward him. This evidence, the surveillance footage, the forensic reports, they're sloppy, too convenient. Someone wanted this to look airtight, but it's fake. Cassius exhaled. Mercer. Selene met his eyes. You were set up. Cassius already knew that. But now he had proof, and that meant one thing. It was time to fight back. Cassius leaned against the wall of Selene's apartment, watching as she worked her magic on her laptop. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, brows furrowed in concentration. It had been 2 days since his escape, and already the city had turned into a hunting ground. His face was on every news channel, every billboard and every front page in Chicago. But Mercer had made one mistake. He left loose ends. And one of those loose ends, Dorian Graves, the so-called key witness who testified against Cassius, swearing under oath that he had broken into the building, stolen confidential documents, and assaulted a security guard. The testimony was what sealed the conviction, and it was a lie. Cassius knew it. Selene knew it. Now they just needed to prove it. Selene exhaled, leaning back in her chair. Found him. Cassius straightened. Where? She turned the screen toward him, showing an address in River North, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Chicago. Cassius let out a humorless chuckle. Mercer's keeping him in a damn penthouse. Selene nodded. A high-rise, private security, gated access. Mercer's making sure no one gets to him. Cassius' jaw clenched. Then we're gonna have to get creative. The penthouse was a fortress. Armed security at the entrance. A concierge desk that probably reported directly to Mercer. Cameras on every floor. They needed a way inside. Selene pulled her coat tighter around her as she approached the front desk, a clipboard in hand. She always had a way of looking like she belonged wherever she went. Cassius, meanwhile, stayed back, his hoodie up, head down. He had changed his appearance as much as he could, new clothes, baseball cap, glasses, but it wasn't enough. Selene flashed the concierge a fake badge. Health inspection, she said briskly. Routine check for penthouse-level residents. Mr. Graves is expecting us. The concierge barely glanced up. ID, Selene handed it over. A beat of silence. Cassius tensed, ready to act, then the man nodded. Go on up. Selene turned on her heel, motioning subtly for Cassius to follow. They stepped into the elevator, and as the doors closed, Cassius exhaled. You're terrifying, Selene smirked. Thank you. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open, penthouse level. The door to Graves' condo was locked, obviously. But Cassius had spent enough time in courtrooms to know how to pick a lock when necessary. Within seconds, they were inside. The place was lavish, high ceilings, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And in the middle of it, Dorian Graves. He was standing in the kitchen, pouring himself a drink. He froze the second he saw Cassius. His face went pale. Jesus Christ. Cassius shut the door behind them. Dorian, Graves stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the counter. You're supposed to be in prison. Cassius took a slow step forward. And you're supposed to be a truthful witness. Guess we're both liars. Graves swallowed hard. Look, man, I had no choice. Mercer, save it. Cassius' voice was low, cold. You testified that you saw me commit a crime I didn't commit. I want to know why. Graves shook his head frantically. I can't. You don't understand what Mercer will do to me. Selene folded her arms. Dorian, do you really think Mercer is going to let you walk away from this? Graves hesitated. Selene pulled out her phone and slid it across the counter. Look at this. Graves reluctantly glanced down. The screen showed a message thread, private emails encrypted. Intercepted. It was Mercer's men talking about cleaning up loose ends, and at the top of that list, Dorian Graves. His hands started shaking. Cassius watched as realization dawned in his eyes. Mercer wasn't protecting him. Mercer was going to get rid of him. Graves looked up, his breathing unsteady. Cassius took a step closer. You have two options. Keep covering for Mercer and end up dead, or tell the truth and finally be free of this. A long, heavy silence. Then Graves nodded. While Cassius and Selene worked on flipping Graves, prosecutor Desmond Rourke was having a crisis of his own. At first, he had written Cassius off as just another crooked lawyer who got caught, but something wasn't adding up. So he started digging, and what he found? Terrifying. A bank account under Cassius' name, one Cassius never opened. Emails sent from Cassius discussing stolen documents, emails Cassius never wrote. Court records that had been altered, evidence tampered with, all of it leading back to one name, Elias Mercer. Rourke sat at his desk, staring at the pile of documents. Cassius Vaughn had been framed, and he had helped do it. His stomach turned. He had sent an innocent man to prison, and that wasn't something he could live with. He picked up his phone. "Detective Whitaker, we need to talk." Whitaker had always known Mercer was dirty. For years he had tried to bring him down, but Mercer was untouchable. Until now. When Rourke called, Whitaker was ready. They met in a quiet diner far away from prying eyes. Rourke laid out the evidence. "Mercer has corrupted every part of the system." Whitaker nodded. "I know." Rourke leaned forward. "Then let's take him down." Whitaker met his gaze, a pause, then, "Let's do it." Cassius leaned against the penthouse balcony, looking down at the city. He had spent years believing in the system. That system had failed him. But now he was going to burn Mercer's empire to the ground. Cellini stepped outside. "Graves is ready to testify. Rourke and Whitaker are in." Cassius exhaled, a slow, satisfied breath. "Then it's time." The air inside Chicago Federal Courtroom 3B was electric, packed. Every seat was filled with reporters, legal experts, and ordinary citizens who had followed the case from the beginning. Some came for justice. Others came for the spectacle. Cassius Vaughn stood at the defense table, no longer a beaten-down man in tattered clothes. This time he wore a suit, not expensive, not flashy, but well-fitted, sharp. The way he used to wear one back when the world knew his name for the right reasons. This time he wasn't just a defendant, he was his own lawyer. Judge Everett Kincaid sat high above him, the same man who had humiliated him weeks ago. But today, Kincaid wasn't smiling. He looked tense, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Cassius leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. He could feel Cellini watching from the front row, her expression unreadable but supportive. This was it. One way or another, it ended today. The first witness took the stand. Dorian Graves. Dressed in a dark suit, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His hands trembled as he took the oath, avoiding Mercer's gaze in the audience. Cassius stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward him. "Mr. Graves, let's cut to the truth. Who orchestrated my arrest?" A long pause. Dorian licked his lips, glanced at Mercer, then finally exhaled sharply. "Elias Mercer." The courtroom exploded in murmurs. Cassius didn't move, didn't react. He let the weight of those words sink in. "Speak clearly for the record, Mr. Graves," he said, his voice calm but firm. Dorian nodded weakly. "Elias Mercer framed you. He paid me to testify against you. He fabricated everything." Another wave of murmurs. Cassius turned to Judge Kincaid. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss all charges based on false testimony." Kincaid shifted uncomfortably. "We'll get to that, Mr. Vaughn. Continue." Cassius turned back to Graves. "What was Mercer's goal?" Dorian swallowed. "To make sure you were convicted, to make sure you were erased." Cassius nodded, then stepped aside. "Your witness, Prosecutor Rourke." Desmond Rourke stood slowly, his face tight with barely contained anger, not at Cassius, at himself, at Mercer, at the corrupt system that had allowed this to happen. He walked to the evidence table, lifted a thick folder, and held it up. "Your Honor, these documents prove beyond a doubt that Mr. Vaughn was framed." The judge frowned. "Elaborate, Mr. Rourke." Rourke opened the folder, pulling out the first page. Bank transactions. A fake account created under Cassius Vaughn's name, funded by a shell company owned by Elias Mercer. Gasps. He pulled out another page. Fabricated emails, supposedly from Vaughn, discussing plans to steal legal documents. Emails traced back to an IP address belonging to Mercer's firm. More gasps. Then he held up one last document. And finally, records showing Mercer has been bribing officials, including judges, for years. Cassius saw it. For the first time in the entire trial, Kincaid paled. Judge Kincaid cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Rourke. Do you have further proof?" That's when Detective Julian Whitaker stood up. Cassius turned, watching as the only honest cop left in the city walked toward the stand. Whitaker spoke without hesitation. Elias Mercer has been running a criminal empire within the justice system for over a decade. We have hard evidence, phone records, wire transfers, witness statements. This goes beyond Cassius Vaughn. This is corruption at the highest level. Then, Whitaker turned directly to Judge Kincaid, and it includes this courtroom. A deathly silence fell over the room. Judge Kincaid's face turned red. "Excuse me." Whitaker didn't blink. "I have proof that you accepted bribes, Your Honor, payments from Mercer in exchange for rigging trials." Chaos, shouting. The sound of the courtroom doors bursting open, and then, "FBI, everyone stay where you are." Federal agents stormed the room, and in the middle of it all, Elias Mercer, still calm, still composed. But his eyes flickered with something Cassius had never seen before: fear. One of the agents walked up, pulling out a warrant. "Elias Mercer, you are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice." The agents grabbed him, handcuffed him, dragged him toward the door, and just as they reached the exit, Mercer turned to Cassius. For the first time in 3 years, Cassius saw the truth in his eyes. Mercer knew it was over. Judge Kincaid, now shaken, cleared his throat. Given the overwhelming evidence, the court has no choice but to declare all charges against Mr. Vaughn dismissed. Cassius exhaled. It was over. Finally over. The sky was clear as Cassius stepped out of the courthouse, breathing in the crisp Chicago air. For the first time in years, he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was free. Cellini stood beside him, arms crossed. "So what now?" Prosecutor Rourke walked up, his expression unreadable. "I misjudged you, Vaughn." Cassius nodded. "Yeah, you did." Rourke smirked slightly. "If you ever decide to get back in the game, maybe we could use a lawyer like you on the right side of the courtroom." Cassius chuckled. "I'll think about it." Then Whitaker stepped forward. "Mercer was just one of many, Vaughn. The system is still broken." Cassius looked around at the courthouse, at the people, at the city that had tried to destroy him and failed. Cellini nudged him. "Do you really think one man can change an entire system?" Cassius smirked. "Watch me." And with that, he walked away. Not as a fugitive, not as a victim, but as Cassius Vaughn, the man who defied corruption.